Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of At the Boundary, the podcast from the Global and National Security Institute at the University of South Florida. I'm Glenn Beckman, Communications Manager at GNSI, and your guest host today for At the Boundary. Today on the podcast, our guest will be Terry Guild. After a 30-year career as a senior U.S. Army intelligence officer, he spent the last 5 years in the defense industry, first at CAE and now at Intrinsic Ventures. He's sitting down for a conversation with GNSI Research Fellow Dr. Guido Rossi to examine the right to repair issue in the military. For many years, decades even, the protocol in the military has been to limit the equipment and gear ordinary soldiers can repair, even if they know how. If a system or a piece of equipment broke down in the field, the solution almost always has been bringing in a specialized contractor or shipping the broken gear somewhere for repair. If you're thinking that doesn't sound very efficient, you might be right, and Congress agrees with you. Earlier this year, they created the Warrior Right to Repair Act of 2025, an attempt to give soldiers and personnel in the field more flexibility and opportunity to repair their own equipment. The legislation is still under consideration and has bipartisan support, but has not been passed yet. Why not? Well, the issue is surprisingly controversial. That's why our guest, Terry Guild, is here today. He and Dr. Rossi will dig into the military's right to repair today on At the Boundary.
Thank you for the introduction, Glenn. Before we begin our conversation today with Terry, here's a little more detail into his background and experience, especially as it pertains to the right to repair issue. He's been a leader in the defense tech industry for 6 years, currently serving as the Vice President of Growth and Mission Solutions at a company called Intrinsic Enterprises, which is an innovative software and technology firm supporting both the Department of Defense and large OEMs with modern software development and delivery, focusing on advanced modeling and simulation, AI, machine learning solutions, and modern software development for mission-critical environments. Before his second career in the defense industry, he retired as a U.S. Army colonel with 30 years of operational experience, including special operations. Because he's lived on both sides of the issue, as a military leader dependent on system readiness, and now as an industry executive responsible for delivering the software that drives modern defense capabilities, he offers a uniquely balanced perspective on right to repair. So we're excited to have him here to help us understand how this legislation affects contractors, the military, and the future sustainment in a software-defined world. So again, thank you so much for joining us and to talk to us on this podcast today about these very controversial but and also very important issue, Terry.
Yeah, thanks, Guido. I really appreciate you guys having me aboard and excited to kind of share some experiences with the team.
Absolutely. So one of the reasons why your collaboration, your presence today is so important is as I mentioned to you, the fact that if you look in the information space, you can find all sorts of opinions on the right to repair issue, but only really from one side of the aisle, and it is from military officials. From commentators in on topics of defense, and then on the politicians that have taken up the issue in Congress and that are supporting the right to repair legislation. And of course, they see all these issues from that side, from their perspective, and they are in support of it, and they think it's good and that it will improve readiness, flexibility, it will save money. But we also know that contractors are extremely opposed to this perspective. And yet in the information space, it's really hard to find the opinions of the contractors. So the specifics as to why they are opposed to it, other than a generalistic statement that it infringes upon intellectual property. And so you today could actually explain to us and really get into exactly why and how that could be not such a great idea, and why exactly the defense industry, the contractors, oppose such legislation. But first, I would invite you to actually tell us a little bit better, what are we talking about? What is this right to repair legislation? that is presently being discussed in Congress as part of the National Defense Authorization for the upcoming year. That now both the House and the Senate have passed, and now there's a joint committee that it's trying to reconcile the two differences between then submitting it to the president for signature.
Okay, yeah, Guido, thanks for that. I appreciate the context, and I think you've outlined it really well. And kind of before I dive in, for me, I just wanted to make it clear that I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a contracts officer. So I'm not really here to give kind of any legal opinions on IP or clauses or acquisition law. My perspective, as you eloquently outlined, is I'm a practitioner. So someone who spent 30 years in the military, relying upon complex systems in the field, and now someone in industry that's helping build the software and the digital capabilities that the military is so dependent upon. So my lens is very operational and practical. What actually happens when a system breaks, what barriers prevent soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines from fixing it, and how industry kind of navigates the balance between security, intellectual property, and supporting kind of the warfighter. So that's the perspective I'll bring. And because this topic does span a breadth of topics, I kind of wanted to bend this a little bit into kind of 6 areas I think will help guide the conversation. So first I'll talk about exactly what the right to repair is in pretty simple terms. Then I'll talk about the areas of contractor competence and ownership that it impacts. Then I'll go through how it impacts the military, right? Both from a positive standpoint and from a negative standpoint. Then I'll kind of explain why this has become such a contentious issue. Then I'll explain how we at Intrinsic, a small software development company, broadly approaches the issue. The reason why I don't think you hear a lot about the contractual side is because we're talking, in some cases, a lot of money. And I think that there's probably a lot in the industry that want to politic but don't want to share their experiences. So I'm really glad you gave me the opportunity to talk about this. So, without any more questions, Guido, I can dive right into it.
Sure, yeah.
So what is kind of the right to repair? So the right to repair has become kind of a buzzword in the commercial world, right? Whether you're talking about tractors, cell phones, consumer electronics. But the conversation inside the Department of Defense really is very different, and the stakes are much higher. So the right to repair authority that's currently being discussed in the NDAA is really fundamentally about giving the military the legal authority to maintain and repair the equipment it owns, not just the authority to acquire it. So when Congress buys a jet, a ground vehicle, a missile system, a satellite, communication system, you name it, the expectation is that the department should be able to sustain it over its entire life cycle without relying upon the vendor or the industry to come in and take care of repairs. Historically, it's not been the case, right? So many systems come with restrictions, data right limitations, proprietary diagnostic software issues, firmware locks. These require the military to rely upon the original contractor for routine repairs, which in many cases affect and impact readiness. And I'll give you kind of a little anecdote on my Army days on an experience I had that's relevant. So during a combat deployment, I had a critical integrated site unit on my Bradley fighting vehicle. That ISU was critical and required to engage targets. This thing went down in the field during a combat deployment, but because of proprietary circuit boards and software, we couldn't fix the problem in the field, even though we had the capability to do it. We had to physically change out the entire integrated site unit, swap it out with a Bradley that was already inoperative. And of course, when you do that, that creates a domino effect to readiness of the force. So Congress knows this.
Sorry, in what way it creates a domino effect?
Well, because now, while you can order the part or get contractors to come in on that vehicle, now have another vehicle that's down for multiple things. It could be an engine, but now it's an integrated site unit. So the maintenance issues of that one vehicle now have exponentially increased, which requires more work. So the military is very good at making sure that they have readiness. So there's spare parts, if they can do that. In some cases, they can't do that at all, right? They may not even be able to pull that integrated site unit out of the Bradley without having a contractor there. That wasn't the case in this example, but it's kind of an example of the larger problem, right? The military wants readiness, and if they're relying upon a contractor to come do that, it creates some significant problems. So Congress knows this, really, and the NDA is attempting to give DoD fair and reasonable access to parts, tools, documentation, diagnostics, and software interfaces needed to conduct these repairs. So that means not just having the right wrench or replacement part, but having the right digital tools. So firmware loaders, configuration utilities, calibration tools, diagnostic software capabilities, technical manuals, and in some cases, access to software, right, or interfaces needed to restore a component to working order. So I think it's also important to note that the legislation does not require contractors to hand over source code, right? Some groups portray it that way. Everything I've read, that's not what the language says. It's about operational reliability, operational repairability, not unrestricted IP disclosure. So there is a difference, and I want to make sure I highlighted that. Mm-hmm. So that's the basic idea. Give the military what it needs to keep its own equipment functioning.
And it sounds great in theory, on paper, right?
In theory, yes. Of course, clearly there's a whole bunch of other complexities associated with this, and it's all really dependent upon the language. So next, I'll talk about the contractor ownership areas that are impacted and affected, right? So this is where the debate gets complicated. In the defense industry, particularly in the software side, companies historically retain broad ownership and control of their technical data. That makes their systems work. This includes source code, firmware processes, configuration tools, cybersecurity mechanisms, diagnostic utilities. The right to repair challenges that model. So I'll break that down into several categories. Number one, technical data rights. So for decades, contractors have negotiated to retain ownership of the data behind their systems, right? So this includes blueprints, interface documentation, algorithms. The department may receive limited data rights, but not often they don't get to independently repair or modify these systems. So that's the technical rights, data rights issue. On the diagnostic or ecosystem issue, a lot of software systems require proprietary tools and diagnose faults, right? Think of this as kind of like taking your car to the dealership because they only have the scan tool that talks to the engine computer. And they're the only ones that have it. So in the military, this could mean a radar array, an engine controller, a mission computer, anything that potentially could be locked behind proprietary software. And then third, kind of what other impact is firmware and cybersecurity, which is a huge issue, right? So repairing a component today means reloading firmware, revalidating crypto keys. Those processes are highly sensitive. Contractors are extremely protective of their firmware loaders and the crypto workflows because if they're improperly used, they can compromise security and integrity of the system. And then kind of a sustainment issue. So, and let's be honest, right? Sustainment is where the money's at. For large contractors, the business case for a platform is not just selling the equipment, right? It's the 30 years of maintenance that follow with that sale. So the right to repair threatens that.
May I ask
recurring revenue model? Yeah.
So may I ask you? I mean, in percentage terms, or how much contractors rely on revenue coming from sustainment versus instead purchase? Yep,
that's a great question, and honestly, a very lowball guess is 60 to 70% is sustainment. So you're talking about a large chunk of the contract.
Very simple. something that if it was threatened in its entirety, could potentially threaten the survivability of the profitability and then the survivability of some companies, especially probably smaller companies. And I'm also guessing that for some systems, it's more about contract and delivery awards. And for others, instead, the revenue from sustainment and repairs, maybe it's higher, right?
Yeah, I think as an average, it's a very high number, right? And so that's why you see a lot of large OEMs politicking and going to Congress and trying to get the language right, because it is threatening a revenue stream. But I think at the end of the day, in my heart believes and hopes that most of these companies are really also thinking about military readiness and what is best for the warfighter. In some cases, I don't think it's that way. I would hope it would be that way for most companies, but I'm a realist. So it is what it is. But I think that number is so huge, and that's why the language in the NDA does threaten that model. It threatens that revenue model. So like I said, I don't think all this is nefarious. Contractors invest heavily in research and development, right? They want to protect their intellectual property, but the tension comes when that IP hampers military readiness. So in the software world, that's even more magnified, I believe. Really, because unlike a mechanical component, software isn't just part of the system, right? It is the core of the system. It is the system. And giving access to repair tools potentially gets dangerously close to exposing source code or proprietary algorithms. And that's kind of the line that we're trying to navigate. So I kind of transition to how it impacts the military, like positively and negatively. So I think that the impacts are significant. But on the positive side, they play huge benefits for the military. As an Army guy, trust me, there's nothing like speed. There's nothing like readiness. There's nothing like controlling your own destiny inside this world. So if something breaks and your maintainers have the tools and access to fix it immediately, you reduce downtime dramatically. You increase readiness. And instead of waiting for a contractor team to fly in, you're back in the fight. So readiness, massively important, as we talked about. Affordability. Sustainment, like we just talked about, sustainment eats most of the defense budget. Every time the military pays a contractor for something they can do themselves, that's money not going to modernization. Operational autonomy, right? In special operations, as an example, we often operate in austere environments where contractor support's pretty limited. And in some cases don't really exist at all. So having the ability to repair your own equipment isn't just convenience. It can be mission critical, as the example I used on the Bradley integrated site unit. And fourth kind of is competition. If more entities can provide maintenance, there's less monopolistic control over the sustainment. But again, on the negative side, we can hit several of these, right? Cybersecurity. Opening up firmware interfaces and diagnostic tools really increase the attack surface. If someone with malicious intent gains access to repair pathways, they could compromise mission critical components. Configuration control is another challenge on the software side, especially like in aviation, where every component needs to match a certified configuration. If different repair shops use like slightly different tools or processes, you can lose control of the baseline. And then certification risks. So even a minor software change can require full regression testing and recertification. So this could allow multiple repair pathways, which increase the risk of unintended software modification or consequences. So there are benefits, and there are negative issues, but these all come with responsibilities and risks. And I think that's really where the NDAA is trying to balance. A lot of politicking from industry on their concerns, but a ton of potential positive outcomes of this from a readiness standpoint within the military. And so this really gets to the issue of why it's so contentious. it gets heated quickly, right? So this topic sits at the crossroads, right, of several sensitive issues: national security, intellectual property, sustainment economics, which we talked about, and political pressure to reduce defense spending. So it's pretty simple. Congress wants to cut sustainment costs. DoD wants operational freedom with no vendor lock, be in control of its own readiness and destiny. Contractors want to protect their IP. Cyber experts want to minimize attack service. And small businesses fear losing their competitive edge, right? Because the competition ecosystem is, as you know, extremely competitive. The smaller business you are, the more you have to protect what makes your culture, what makes you different from other large companies. So everyone has a stake in this. And so when you have multiple pressure points and multiple stakeholders, you're bound to have friction. So for my military days, I understand DoD's frustration with being dependent on vendors, for every repair. From my industry perspective now, I also understand why companies fear broad disclosure of technical data, especially proprietary software. So these competing priorities are what make the right to repair very difficult. And I don't think it's that anyone opposes readiness. It's the method of achieving it that's touching a lot of this sensitive ground. And I guess, from a small business perspective, we view the right to repair in a little bit different of a lens than a large OEM, right? For us, source code isn't just about intellectual property. It's about our competitive identity, as I discussed. We don't have
the system. It is the core of it. It's the entirety of it. It's not just a component.
Right. Yeah. We don't have massive portfolios to fall back on. If we're forced to disclose too much, we lose our ability to innovate and lose our ability to compete. But at the same time, we absolutely support giving the military the tools and access they need to fix their own systems. Again, for a small business, Intrinsic, we review the right to repair through a really different lens than big OEMs. So for us, again, it's not just intellectual property, but it's our competitive identity. We don't have massive portfolios to fall back on. If we're forced to disclose too much, right, we lose our ability to innovate and compete. So, but at the same time, again, we absolutely support giving the military the tools and access they need to fix their own systems in support of readiness. We believe in readiness, autonomy, and warfighter empowerment. If you're a defense contractor, that's the way you should be thinking. We have to protect the heart and soul of our country. I have a son that's in the military. My entire family was in the military. So it's important that industry comes into this with a perspective of the number one customer is saving lives and readiness. Yes, revenue is important because it's how you feed your family. It's how you grow the business. But it should not be at the expense of our warfighter. And again, I'm not sure all companies are like this. I think for a small business, it's critical that we understand the impact and we adjust. So I think it's real critical that we look at how do we do both, right? How does this community come together and balance these things? And here's a Terry Guild answer, right? It's not probably the answer, but we can provide repair relevant technical data without exposing sensitive information, algorithms, or source code, right? We give secure diagnostic interfaces, not open-ended access. We support modular technical data packages, meaning the military gets exactly what it needs to maintain the system, but we don't compromise cybersecurity or intellectual property. That's the balance, and it's difficult. This is not an easy task, right? But it's something that I think industry and the military are going to end up having to deal with. Yes, sir.
And my question is, how do we exactly do that? Is that does that work on an individual basis for each system and for each company, or?
Well, so it's a great question, right? Because you're talking scale. I mean, at the end of the day, we need to look at the contractual language when we enter into an agreement with the department. And inside that contractual language for each opportunity, at least from a software perspective, the vendor should be able to provide not keys to the kingdom for DoD, but keys that's going to keep that system active without making a phone call, right? So that should be explicit in the contractual agreement between the military and industry. And a lot of times these contracts, because there's so many of them, they become very blanket oriented. Exactly. It's cut and paste, right? It's we did it that way this time. We can do it, we can just cut and paste that into this contract. Well, I think the days of doing that, if we want to get this right, have to be numbered, right? We have tools of the trade now. We can make these tailored very specifically to the things that the government is wanting from industry and what industry has a responsibility to do contractually with the government. So,
because like you mentioned, my understanding is that the language that they're trying to establish in future contracts, it's pretty blanket statements of just forcing contractors to provide fair and reasonable access to repairs and tools and expertise.
Yeah,
and it doesn't always apply.
Right. It definitely should be tailored. And again, like I said before, fair and reasonable access does not mean you're giving up all the source code, right? It is a broad statement, and I think each contract probably needs to be negotiated in a way based upon the inherent specific scenario that contract company is under, whether you're small or large OEM, sustainment costs. So all that should be considered. It takes a lot more work on the government's part, to be honest with you. A lot more maybe contract officers, because contracting is slow, as you know. Probably say they're backlogged everywhere. So kind of, I guess kind of the last thing is how does this play out, right? How does this play out to include kind of the delays? So if I would take a second to talk about the future, particularly with the delays in Congress, right? The NDA is delayed due to kind of unrelated political disputes. We all know this. Mm-hmm. But in practical terms, this means the right to repair is still fluid. It hasn't been finalized. As you know, it hasn't been stripped out. Stakeholders on both sides are using this extra time to influence the outcome. We know this. But I don't have a crystal ball. But if I did, here's what I think will happen. Don't hold me accountable for this. But contract language is going to become more standardized, but should be flexible. Instead of renegotiating and sustainment access every single time, right? DoD will move towards common, repeatable requirements for repair data and diagnostic tools. Again, standard language. Concern with that is it's not tailored to the specific capability of the company or the capability or the requirement that DoD is looking for. I think second, again, we talked a little bit about this, future contexts will require open diagnostics and maintenance interfaces. New systems, will be built on secure repair access pathways from the start. This means APIs, modular data interfaces, and well-documented repair procedures. Years and years ago, with many missile systems, you would get everything. You would get books this big, and you would have technical manuals, and the contractors weren't relied upon so heavily. Things have changed over the last 20, 25 years, and so we're kind of back to a little bit of square one. I think another important part of this is legacy systems will receive waivers on partial compliance. So retrofitting older systems, super expensive, technically risky because there's so many other pieces and parts and components that rely upon those legacy systems. So many will get exemptions from this, I'm guessing. And then I think contractors are going to have to shift towards modular technical data packages, kind of a middle ground solution, which is it lets the government repair systems while protecting the contractor source code and cybersecurity architecture. Contractors are going to have an additional responsibility to make those maintenance interfaces available and open to the government with technical manuals to show them how to do it. So they don't have to call. That's going to reduce sustainment time. And I think that's probably one of the most contentious issues with the current language. And it kind of finally, it's going to move forward, right, carefully. It won't be a sweeping universal mandate that most advocates or some advocates want, but it's not going to be defeated. So the final result, I think, is going to be a balanced compromise between readiness, with readiness being the most important thing, and then intellectual property protection. So kind of a smart middle ground that honors both operational needs and the realities of modern software development. So kind of that's the landscape. I mean, we covered a little bit of what the legislation is, where the contract ownership is and how it impacts that, how it impacts the military, why it's contentious, and how small businesses like Intrinsic view it, and kind of how it's likely to unfold, including kind of the latest NDAA delays. So right to repair isn't about politics or ideology. It's about readiness, empowerment, and protecting the innovative ecosystem that supports the warfighter, our industrial or defense industrial base. With thoughtful implementation, I believe we can achieve all those goals. So really appreciate you letting me talk about this. Again, I'm not the expert on contractual matters or legal opinions, but as a practitioner, I do see both sides. And I really hope that most of industry has the warfighter in mind first and try to balance their business needs with knowing why we're here and why we're in this business. So Guido, again, I'll turn it over to you for any final thoughts or questions.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can only thank you again for participating. I think it sounds like you and your company not only have an understanding of the challenges of the warfighters, but also that you care. And so that you're willing to push forward models that not only ensure profitability and survivability of your company, but also that improve warfighting capabilities, readiness, flexibility, cost saving, and so. And it's I think also the landscape that you think will result from these. It's a bit of a reassuring landscape, a reassuring possibility, I think, than what I was thinking previously. And it's interesting to see that it's such a harsh confrontation right now. Between contractors and the military side and legislative side will result probably in a compromise. But it sounds this compromise will benefit both and will just improve national security and defense capabilities. So that's pretty reassuring. I have just one more question. So. Yeah. When I was mentioning at the beginning that most perspectives that you can find in the information space are in support of this legislation, actually, there was an article that came out recently penned by retired Commander Kirk Lippold, who was commanding officer of USS Cole, who actually opposes this legislation, arguing that the possibility that repairs would fall on third parties, so not contractors and not the military, that could be dangerous. It could expose the systems to espionage or security breaches, or simply just unreliability, or repairs not being scrutinized to respect the standards and whatnot. My question is it possible that third parties would operate these repairs? And secondly, do you think these concerns are valid?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And while I haven't read that article, I'm definitely going to look it up. I think he's definitely got a point, right? So from a capacity and a scaling standpoint, if we're not talking about routine repairs, and we're talking about depot level maintenance on a major system where the military doesn't have the capability or expertise, you got to rely upon the vendor. But bringing in a third party, I could definitely see that as a potential avenue that DoD takes, maybe from an expense standpoint, time standpoint, and that opens you up to more vulnerabilities. I think I think really the concern is capacity. There's certain level things that have to be done at various levels of echelons of maintenance, depending on what it is. But on the software side, again, I talked about cybersecurity issues and vulnerabilities associated with that. It puts more onus on the contractors to make sure that the military has all the technical manuals and the understanding of how to fix certain things, right? So I've talked about these maintenance interfaces where that maintenance interface can be used by someone inside the military to do quick fixes or operational repairs, so that system's not offline. But yeah, I definitely can see how that is a potential path. I don't think it's something that you should wash your hands and say, well, it's going to happen all the time. We shouldn't do this. I think the military has a certain responsibility to be disciplined in how they approach this, knowing full well and the commander at the end of the day is going to manage risk. He's going to manage risk to the mission, to the force. And if the commander thinks there is vulnerabilities and risk associated with going to a third party, then they ought not to do that. They ought to figure out a way to do it. So inherently, at the end of the day, this is commander level business, and they have to manage the risk based upon the scenario. But yeah, I'll definitely look at that article. It's kind of fascinating.
Well, thank you so much again. And, for looking at these topics from really now every perspective, every angle. So we're very grateful.
Yeah. Thanks again for your time and letting me come in and talk to you guys.
As you've heard today, the military's right to repair issue continues to be a flashpoint, both within the ranks, the defense industry, and Congress. Special thanks today to our guest, Terry Guild, as well as GNSI Research Fellow Dr. Guido Rossi. If you're interested, you can also read a recent Right to Repair article on military.com, in which Guido is extensively quoted. We'll drop a link in the show notes. Before we let you go today, a couple of quick reminders. First, save the dates for a pair of important GNSI events in early 2026. GNSI Tampa Summit 6 takes place March 24th and 25th. It's titled Cracks in the Lamp, Freeing the Nuclear Genie. We'll convene an all-star lineup of experts to tackle all things nuclear, weapons, energy, the military's proposed use of nuclear reactors, the role of nukes in the Golden Dome, proliferation and deterrence, and much, much more. Be on the lookout for additional details as we flip the calendar to 2026. Also, the following month, we're excited to be hosting the first ever GNSI International Security Experience, April 14th through the 17th. ISE is a 4-day student-focused experience with multiple events, including the 2026 Intelligence and Technology Conference, the student-led conference Shadow and Circuit, the next generation of national security led by USF's Future Strategist program. There will also be an undergraduate strategy competition featuring 16 university teams from around the country, including the Citadel, Texas A&M, USF, Arizona State, North Carolina, the University of Texas, University of Tampa, and quite a few more. There will also be a National Security Career Fair on April 16th. Ping us if you're an organization interested in reserving some space for that event to do some recruiting among the finest national security and intelligence students at USF. We'll drop a link in the show notes. The latest GNSI newsletter dropped last week. It's a great way to keep up with the work going on from our entire team. You can find it on our website, and if you want to get it in your inbox every month, make sure you subscribe. Finally, the latest episode of the GNSI video series is now available on our YouTube channel. Strategy and Research Manager Dr. Taj Snoffer leads a follow-up discussion on some of the key takeaways from the 2025 Warsaw Security Forum, held recently in Poland. Tad spoke at that conference. You can find a link to the episode in the show notes. All right, next week on the podcast, we wrap up 2025 and this season of At the Boundary with a very special guest, retired Air Force Lieutenant General Michael Plain. He's the former Deputy Commander of U.S. Southcom, and he also served as the President of the National Defense University. That will be our last podcast of the year, as we'll take a winter break along with the rest of USF. ATB will return on January 12th. But we have one more episode next week, so make sure you tune in for that. Thanks for listening today. If you like the podcast, please subscribe and let your friends and colleagues know about the pod. And tell them to subscribe as well, if you would. You can follow GNSI on our LinkedIn and X accounts at USF_GNSI and check out our website as well, usf.edu/GNSI. That's going to wrap up this episode of At the Boundary. Each new episode will feature global and national security issues we found to be worthy of attention and discussion. I'm Glenn Beckman. Thanks for listening today. We'll see you next week at the Boundary.